Riverview Family Diner. 6:47 p.m. The booth smelled like maple syrup and old coffee, and my daughter had ketchup on her chin that she'd been ignoring for 10 minutes. "More fries, please," Sophie announced to no one in particular, already reaching across the table. "Say the magic word," my husband said from behind his phone. "Daddy, please, and thank you, and can I have more fries?" He laughed, still not looking up. That was normal. The phone at dinner, the half-present laughter, the way his eyes stayed on the screen even when his mouth was moving. I had learned to stop noticing it the way you stop noticing the hum of the refrigerator. It was just the sound of my marriage. I cut Sophie's chicken into smaller pieces, even though she was 7 now and perfectly capable. Some habits are harder to break than children are to raise. "Mom," she said, watching my hands with great suspicion. "Eat. The candy doctor doesn't cut my food." I set the fork down. "What?" She was already chasing a fry around her plate. "The doctor with the candy jar. The one Daddy takes me to. She lets me cut my own food." A pause for dramatic emphasis. "And she has gummy bears? The good kind, not the gross ones." My husband's thumb stopped moving on his phone screen. It was a small thing, a fraction of a second. But I noticed it the way you notice a light flickering once before it goes out completely. "Who's the candy doctor, sweetheart?" I kept my voice easy. Sophie shrugged with the full-body commitment only 7-year-olds can manage. "I don't know her name. She has a fish tank. I like the orange one." I looked at my husband across the table. His expression was smooth, pleasant, exactly calibrated. He gave me a small smile. "One of the pediatric lab techs at the urgent care we went to last spring, remember? She had a stomach bug. I grabbed the closest place." He picked up his water glass. "Sophie has been talking about those gummy bears ever since, and I believed him in the way you believe things when the alternative is too large to look at directly." The dinner moved on. Sophie got her fries. The ketchup eventually got wiped from her chin. We drove home through the dark streets of our suburb, and I put my daughter to bed and told her I loved her and listened to her breathe for a moment longer than usual before I closed her door. I don't know what changed in my chest that night. Something settled wrong, like a bone healing crooked. I pulled up my app for her pediatrician, Dr. Malone, Elmwood Children's Clinic, the next morning while Sophie was at school. I had always been the one to keep her medical records organized. My husband handled the finances, the car maintenance, the complicated things that required patience and spreadsheets. I handled the children's world. That was how we had divided it. Cleanly and without much discussion, the way you divide a closet. There was no visit last spring, no stomach bug, no urgent care, no closest place he knew. I sat with that for a long time at the kitchen table, the coffee going cold in front of me. It could be nothing. He misremembered. It was a year ago. Busy man, busy schedule. He traveled for work, consulting for pharmaceutical distribution companies up and down the East Coast. Half his days looked the same. I typed pediatric labs near our zip code into my phone and then deleted it, feeling foolish. Then I typed it again. There were 11 results. I looked at each one. Most were hospital-affiliated. One, tucked at the bottom of the list, made me pause. Helix Children's Specialty Diagnostics. The website was clean and minimal, the kind of clean that comes from money, not simplicity. Their services listed included genetic screening, comprehensive metabolic panels, and what they called advanced hereditary profiling. There was a fish tank in the photo of their waiting room, a big one built into the wall. I could see the orange fish from across the screen. I drove there at 10 in the morning without calling ahead. The receptionist was kind and unhelpful. No, she couldn't confirm or deny any patient's appointment history. Yes, they specialized in pediatric genetic services. Yes, they accepted certain private insurance plans. No, she couldn't tell me anything further without signed authorization from the primary account holder. "Who is the primary account holder for the patients in this practice?" I asked. She looked at me with professional sympathy. "That varies by family." I asked who had established our daughter's account. She said she couldn't tell me that either, but the way her eyes moved briefly to her screen and then away told me everything. There was an account. My daughter had been here. and I was not the one who had set it up. I drove home with my hands very steady on the wheel. That steadiness frightened me more than shaking would have. It meant some part of me had been expecting this, had been waiting without knowing it was waiting. My husband kept his home office locked out of habit. Client confidentiality, he'd said when he first installed the deadbolt. Sensitive pharmaceutical contracts, competitive information, nothing I needed to worry about. For 4 years, I had not worried about it. I stood in front of that door for the first time and understood that I had made a decision without knowing I was making one every single time I walked past it. The spare key was in the kitchen utility drawer, on a ring with the shed key and the key to my mother's house, 3 states away. I had always known it was there. His desk was exactly what I expected. Precise, labeled, controlled. 3 monitors, a color-coded filing system, a row of legal pads with his narrow handwriting. I opened the top drawer. Pens, paper clips, a charging cable. The second drawer, old contracts, client folders, everything properly dated. The third drawer was locked with a small separate key that wasn't in the utility ring. I remembered reading years ago that the most common hiding place for a secondary key is taped to the underside of the drawer above. I lifted the middle drawer as far as it would go and reached underneath. My fingertips found a small brass key held in place with a strip of masking tape. The third drawer held 2 things: a burner phone, powered off, and a manila envelope with no label. Inside the envelope was a correspondence history with a law firm I did not recognize, Aldridge, Payne and Associates, based in Charleston, South Carolina. The letters were addressed to a Daniel R. Hargrove. My husband's name was Daniel J. Hargrove. The middle initial was different. I almost dismissed it. Then I read the first letter. It opened with the phrase, "Regarding the estate of Mr. Franklin D. Hargrove." I read the whole thing twice. Then I sat down on my husband's office floor and read it a 3rd time. My husband had told me his parents died in a car accident when he was 23. It was the first sad thing he had ever told me about himself, told early in our relationship with a brevity that made it feel real. No performance, no lingering. I had held his hand and felt how lucky I was that he trusted me with it. His parents, both of them, gone at once. Franklin D. Hargrove was not dead. He was 81 years old, confined to a memory care facility outside Charleston, and according to the letter dated 14 months ago, he had recently been reclassified as having diminished capacity for legal decision-making. His estate was valued at approximately $4.7 million. There were more letters. I read all of them. 7 years ago, before my husband and I met, there had been a federal fraud conviction. Securities manipulation. My husband had served 2 years, been released, and built his consulting career under the slightly altered name he now used professionally. The conviction meant he was legally excluded from his father's inheritance under the terms of a trust established by his grandparents. The estate would pass instead to any direct biological descendant of Franklin Hargrove who was not themselves barred. The most recent letter, dated 6 weeks ago, was from an attorney named Clark Payne. It confirmed receipt of DNA documentation for one minor female, identified in the file as S.H., born 2017, submitted as a potential direct biological grandchild of Franklin D. Hargrove for the purpose of establishing inheritance standing. S.H. Sophie Hargrove. My daughter. The walls of the office were a pale gray. I had helped him choose the color. I had stood in the paint aisle at the hardware store holding swatches and laughing at names like Foggy Morning and Quiet Thunder. And we had settled on this one because it felt calm, he had said. Professional, but warm. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I resealed the envelope. I locked the drawer, replaced the key under the masking tape, pushed the drawer closed. I walked out of the office and locked the door behind me and put the key back in the utility drawer between the shed key and my mother's house key. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink. I stood at the window and watched the neighbor's sprinkler system click on automatically across the street. Then I called my college roommate, whose name was Patricia, who had spent 7 years as a family law paralegal before moving into private investigative work. I had not called her for anything more serious than birthday wishes in 3 years. She picked up on the second ring. I need help, I said. The real kind. She drove to me the next morning and sat across from me at the kitchen table while Sophie was at school, and I told her everything. Patricia had a way of listening that made no sound at all. When I finished, she looked at her notes for a moment. He had your daughter's DNA tested without your consent, she said. Yes, to submit her as a claimant to his father's estate, which he himself is barred from inheriting. Yes. And he married you. She paused, choosing her words with obvious care. When exactly relative to this plan? I had done the math already that night on the kitchen floor. We met at a work function. He had been warm and funny and slightly disorganized in a way that felt real. We dated for 9 months. He proposed on a Tuesday morning over coffee, quietly, the ring inside a mug. I had cried. We were married 18 months after we met. Sophie was born 2 years into the marriage. Franklin Hargrove had been diagnosed with early dementia approximately 4 years before my husband and I met. The timeline of his estate planning, the trust amendments, the exclusion clause for the fraud conviction, had been finalized 3 years before we met. I don't know when the plan started, I said. I only know it was before Sophie was born. Patricia set down her pen. Okay, here's what we're going to do. She spent 3 hours explaining it. We needed the physical documents as evidence, originals, not copies. We needed a family law attorney, someone who specialized in financial coercion and cases involving minors. We needed to be careful because my husband was intelligent, methodical, and had already proven he could maintain a false narrative for years without strain. Don't confront him yet, Patricia said at the door. He doesn't know you know. That's the only advantage you have. Don't spend it. I lasted 4 days, not because I was impulsive, because on the 4th day, my daughter came home from school and told me she had a new doctor's appointment on Saturday. Daddy had told her she was going to get to see the orange fish again. I called Patricia from the bathroom with the shower running. He's moving the timeline, I said. He's trying to get more documentation before I figure it out. How do you know that? Because he's scheduling another visit to the genetic clinic with our daughter for this weekend, and he didn't mention it to me. A pause. Okay, Patricia said. New plan. The attorney she connected me with was named Miriam Okafor. She had a corner office downtown, family law, and she had the kind of phone manner that made you feel she had already won before the hearing was scheduled. She listened to my summary in under 20 minutes and then said, "Get me the originals from that drawer. Everything. And I need you to let me put a recorder on you when you confront him." You want me to confront him? Controlled on your terms, with Sophie out of the house. His reaction is evidence. His explanation is evidence. Everything he says to defend himself will either corroborate your account or contradict it in ways that will matter in court. Her voice was even. He has been building his case for years. We need 1 day to start building ours. Sophie went to her grandmother's on Friday afternoon. My mother-in-law, my own mother, not his. His mother was dead, he had told me. His mother, I now suspected, might be in a memory care facility in South Carolina alongside a man with a fish tank in his waiting room and 4.7 million reasons to be found. I had removed the envelope from the office drawer the night before, photographed everything, and secured the originals in a safe deposit box at a bank 2 towns over, registered in my maiden name. The key was in my coat pocket. I could feel its weight all morning. My husband came downstairs at 8:30, poured himself coffee, checked his phone. He was wearing the blue sweater I had given him for his birthday the year before. I had picked it out at a boutique in the city because the color matched his eyes, and I had wanted, in the middle of an ordinary November, to do something that made him happy. I thought about that, standing at the counter, watching him. "We need to talk," I said. He looked up with an easy smile. "Sophie's doctor appointment is Saturday. Not today. I know I should have mentioned it, babe. I just forgot you didn't know the time yet. Not about the appointment." I set my coffee mug down. About Franklin Hargrove. The smile stayed on his face for exactly 1 second too long. Then it faded into something quieter. He set his mug on the counter with the same deliberate softness of a man deciding which version of himself to become in the next 30 seconds. "Where did you hear that name?" His voice was level, not angry. Calculating. "The letters in your locked drawer, the ones from Aldridge, Payne, and Associates." I watched his jaw tighten. "The DNA results for SH, the inheritance claim, the estate." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed his arms and leaned against the counter and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not quite contempt, not quite pity. Something between them. "You went through my private files. You took our daughter to a genetic testing clinic without telling me, multiple times, for her health. The pivot was immediate smooth. Advanced carrier screening, hereditary disease panels. My family has a history of early onset cardiac conditions, you know that. I wanted to know if she was at risk. It was a gift. I was protecting her." "Your parents died in a car accident," I said. "You told me that on our third date. There is no family medical history because there is no family, you said."
"I simplified it."
His voice sharpened. "My parents are estranged. Have been for years. I didn't want to get into the entire complicated disaster of that on a third date with someone I was falling for. Is that really so hard to understand?" It was good. I had to give him that. The pivot from lie to painful truth I protected you from was good. The slight edge of wounded dignity was exactly calibrated. "You submitted her DNA to an estate attorney," I said, "as a biological heir to your father's $4.7 million estate. An estate you are personally barred from inheriting because of a federal fraud conviction that you have also never mentioned to me." The kitchen went very still. He looked at me for a long moment, then something in his posture shifted, not collapsing, recalibrating. The mask did not fall off so much as it reorganized itself into something colder and less bothered by the performance. "You don't understand the legal complexity," he said quietly. "Explain it to me. My grandfather built something. My father built on it. I made a mistake at 26 that cost me my right to inherit any of it, a mistake I have spent the last 12 years paying for in every possible way." His voice was controlled. Precise. "Sophie is innocent in all of this. She carries that bloodline cleanly. The exclusion clause does not apply to her. If she is established as a direct heir, the inheritance can be managed in a trust until she's 25, and at that point, you would be her father, and the primary influence over how she uses it." He didn't answer. "You've been planning this since before she was born," I said. "Maybe since before we met. You needed a child. A biological child from a woman with a clean background and no complications. You needed an heir." "I needed a family," he said, and the rawness in his voice almost fooled me. "I needed something that was mine that no court could take away." Yes, I saw the financial possibility. I saw a way to reclaim something that should have been mine. But I love Sophie. I love you. Those things are not mutually exclusive. You had our daughter's tissue typed without my consent or knowledge. You lied to her, told her it was a fun doctor's visit. You lied to me about his parents being dead. You built a legal strategy around our child's body without ever once asking me if I agreed. I held his gaze. "Tell me how that is love." He moved toward me. I stepped back. Something shifted in his eyes, the calculation returning, colder now. "You have no standing to fight this, Rachel." His voice dropped. "The genetic testing was done with parental consent. I am her parent. My signature is sufficient. And if you think you're going to walk into a courtroom and call me an unfit father over estate planning for our daughter's financial future, I will bury you in legal fees until there is nothing left." "I have the letters," I said. "I have all of them. You stole private documents. I photographed them and returned them. Originals are somewhere you will not find." He stared at me. For a moment, he looked genuinely startled. I think it was the first time he understood that I had been preparing, not panicking. "Sophie is at my mother's," I said. "I am leaving this house today. If you try to contact her school, her doctor, or my family before I have spoken to my attorney, I will add that to the list." I picked up my coat. The key pressed against my palm through the fabric. Rachel. His voice behind me was quiet. Don't do this. You're going to tear everything apart over paperwork. I turned at the door. He looked tired suddenly. Or maybe he was just trying on tired the way he tried on everything else. You tore it apart, I said. I'm just the one who finally looked at the pieces. I left. The family court hearing was 6 weeks after that. Miriam had filed for temporary sole custody based on documented evidence of medical procedures performed on a minor without the other parent's informed consent, and on the broader pattern of financial manipulation involving the child as an instrument. Patricia had located a deposition from the estate attorneys in Charleston, confirming my husband had represented himself as the exclusive parent in contact with Helix Diagnostics. She had also located his prior conviction record, which he had successfully expunged from standard background checks but not from federal court archives. His attorney, a compact, aggressive man in a gray suit, called me paranoid and territorial. He suggested I had fabricated a financial motive to conceal my own emotional instability during what he called a difficult period in the marriage. He submitted a character statement from my husband's business partner and 2 neighbors who described him as a devoted, present, attentive father. Miriam submitted the letters from the estate attorneys. She submitted the appointment records from Helix Diagnostics, 3 visits over 14 months, all scheduled by my husband, none of which appeared in Sophie's official medical file. She submitted the audio recording from our kitchen, my husband's voice explaining inheritance exclusion clauses and trust management in the same breath that he said he loved us. She submitted a declaration from the director of Helix Diagnostics confirming that the testing performed had been comprehensive hereditary profiling consistent with donor or inheritance compatibility screening, not standard pediatric wellness care. And then she submitted a letter from Clark Payne of Aldridge, Payne & Associates, written voluntarily after Patricia reached out to the firm. The letter stated that Daniel R. Hargrove had contacted the firm approximately 6 years ago and requested guidance on establishing biological heir standing for a minor child not yet born. The consultation had predated my husband's first date with me by 3 months. I heard my own breathing in the courtroom when Miriam read that part aloud. The judge was a tall man named Judge Warren Ellis, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the demeanor of someone who had decided a long time ago not to be surprised by human behavior. He reviewed the documentation without visible reaction. He asked my husband 3 direct questions. Had he disclosed his prior federal conviction to his wife before marriage? Had he informed his wife of the genetic testing? Had he consulted estate attorneys about their unborn child before the child was conceived? My husband's attorney objected to the 3rd question on relevance grounds. Judge Ellis overruled him without looking up from the file. My husband answered no, and that the 3rd question mischaracterized the nature of the consultations. Judge Ellis set down the file and looked at him for a long time over the reading glasses. The temporary order granted me sole legal and physical custody of Sophie. My husband was permitted supervised visitation, 2 hours per week at a family services center, pending a full psychological evaluation and the conclusion of an investigation by the South Carolina Estate Court into the DNA submission, which had been filed without disclosure that the submitting parent had a conflict of interest. He sat very still as the gavel came down. He did not look at me as we gathered our things. He did not say anything. He walked out of the courtroom between his attorneys with his shoulders straight and his face composed, and I thought about the man who had proposed with a ring inside a coffee mug on a Tuesday morning and told me with genuine warmth that he wanted something that was his and no court could take away. He had been talking about money. I had thought he was talking about many. I collected Sophie from my mother's house that evening. She ate cereal for dinner at my mother's kitchen table and told me in great detail about a dream she'd had involving a talking horse and a very rude mailman, and I sat across from her and watched her eat and thought about how completely ordinary she looked and how extraordinary that was. 7 months later, I was standing in my new kitchen, smaller than the old one, and painted the wrong shade of yellow and mine, when an email arrived from a law firm in Charleston. I did not open it for an hour. It was from Clark Payne. Brief, professionally worded. Franklin D. Hargrove had passed away 3 weeks earlier. The estate was in probate. Mr. Payne wrote that, in his review of the circumstances surrounding the prior DNA submission, and following his firm's cooperation with the custody proceedings, he had felt obligated to share the situation with Mr. Boat, Hargrove's appointed healthcare advocate. In the final months of his life, Mr. Hargrove had been made aware that he had a granddaughter, Mr. Clove. Hargrove had subsequently amended a small discretionary provision of his estate outside the main trust, establishing a dedicated educational account in the amount of $62,000 for Sophie Hargrove to be administered by her mother until Sophie turned 18. The gift was unconditional and carried no inheritance standing. It came from a grandfather who had been told, in simple terms he could still understand, that he had a little girl in his family who liked orange fish and gummy bears. I read the email twice and then set my phone face down on the counter and stood very still. It wasn't justice. Justice would have meant none of it happened. It was something smaller and stranger, the residue of a good thing buried under years of calculation, surfacing at the end just barely intact. Sophie was in the backyard trying to teach the neighbor's dog to sit. I could hear her through the window, patient and authoritative in the way children are when they have decided they know better than the animal. The dog was not sitting. She told it to try again. I had started keeping a record the week after I left the house on Riverview Drive. Dates, conversations, documents, everything. My attorney said it would be useful for the civil proceedings still working through the courts. Maybe it would be, but I had started it for a different reason. Because I needed to write down what had happened in order to believe it had happened to me, and not to some woman in a story who had been careless in a way I would never be. I had been careless. I had trusted a locked door. I had accepted simplified explanations for painful things because accepting them was easier than asking the question underneath. I had watched my daughter climb into a car with a man I believed completely and not thought once to wonder where they were going. I would not stop wondering again. Sophie gave up on the dog and came inside trailing grass on her socks and announced that she needed a snack immediately. And also the dog was not a good listener, but it's not his fault. Probably no one taught him. I gave her an apple and a handful of crackers and watched her eat at the kitchen table in the wrong yellow kitchen that was mine. "Mom," she said with her mouth full. "Chew first." She chewed, swallowed. "Are we going to get a dog? Maybe someday." "I would teach it to sit," she said with absolute confidence. "I'm pretty good at teaching." "I know you are," I said, and I meant it in every direction it could possibly go.